It was just another ordinary Tuesday at the university. The sun was shining brightly over the sprawling campus, and students hurriedly shuffled from one building to the next, eager to attend their classes. On the main quad, the usual chatter and laughter echoed, with groups of friends gathering around benches, preparing for their next lectures or enjoying a quick snack before the next class. No one had any idea that, within a few hours, their world would be flipped upside down, a nightmare would unfold, and their lives would be changed forever. Inside the towering, modern architecture of the campus buildings, a large lecture hall on the third floor of the science building hosted over 50 students. Among them was Alex, a second-year biology major. He sat at the back of the room, barely paying attention to the professor, Dr. Simmons, who was in the middle of his lecture on human anatomy. Alex's eyes were half-lidded, distracted by his phone. He was anxious about an upcoming test and was trying to look over his notes. Near the front of the room, Maria, a senior student, sat with a group of friends, laughing softly at a joke one of them had made. Unlike Alex, she was always on top of her work, focused and diligent. Her eyes darted across the board as Dr. Simmons highlighted the intricate details of the human circulatory system. She had long been fascinated by the human body, and despite the occasional joking around, she found herself absorbed in the lecture. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the hallway outside the lecture hall. The noise was jarring, but it didn't seem to faze the students. Everyone assumed it was just some construction or maintenance workers making their usual racket. But as moments passed, the thundering sounds became more frequent, more erratic. It was almost as if someone was desperately pounding on the walls. The noise was now accompanied by an unsettling series of muffled screams. Dr. Simmons hesitated for a moment, sensing something wasn't right. He paused his lecture, his gaze fixed on the door as if trying to hear more clearly. The students noticed his unease, but none of them knew what to make of it. "It's probably nothing," Alex muttered to his friend seated beside him, trying to shrug off the growing tension. "Maybe someone's having a bad day." But the uneasy murmurs spread quickly through the room. Alex's friend, James, nudged him, his face pale, his eyes wide in disbelief. Alex, look out the window." Alex turned towards the large windows that lined one side of the hall. He squinted against the sunlight and then froze. Outside, chaos was unfolding. People were running, sprinting, across the quad in every direction. But it wasn't the normal rush of students leaving class. No, these people were panicked, looking over their shoulders as if something was chasing them. And then Alex saw it. One person, a student he recognized from his chemistry class, was dragging themselves along the ground, their body covered in blood, their skin pale and discolored. The student's mouth was open in a grotesque, hungry snarl. Another student was falling, their body being consumed by something invisible. A sinking feeling spread through Alex's chest as he turned back toward the front of the room, his mind racing with confusion and fear. Something was horribly wrong. Dr. Simmons, who had also caught sight of the carnage outside, hurried to the door and swung it open. As he did, a disheveled, panicked figure burst in, a student from the law school. Her clothes were torn, and she had blood smeared across her face. Her eyes were wide, her breathing erratic, and her voice cracked as she shouted, They're eating people. It's happening everywhere. You have to get out of here." The room froze in shock. The door slammed behind the student as she collapsed onto the floor, trembling uncontrollably. Her body trembled violently, her face contorted in fear. The students, unable to comprehend the madness unfolding outside, stared at one another in disbelief. Maria's heart pounded as she processed the horrifying message. "What do you mean, eating people?" she whispered, her voice trembling. Alex, shaking his head in disbelief, stood up slowly, his hands slightly trembling as he reached for his backpack. Something told him this was no ordinary outbreak. He had been hearing strange rumors lately, whispers from the internet, about a mysterious infection. But this was something worse. The air was thick with tension. Fear began to seep into the room as students murmured to each other, trying to make sense of the chaos. Some whispered about the zombie virus they had heard about in urban legends. Others thought it was some kind of elaborate prank. But with each passing second, it became increasingly clear that the world they once knew was slipping away from them. Dr. Simmons stepped back from the door, his eyes wide with panic. "Stay here. Everyone stay put," he barked, but his voice lacked conviction. He knew, deep down, that there was no safety inside the building anymore. His mind raced, he had to make a decision quickly. But before he could act, there was a loud, ferocious crash from the hallway. The door flew open, and in came more of them, groaning, blood-soaked figures, their eyes vacant but hungry. The nightmare had arrived. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as the first of the infected entered the lecture hall. His mind screamed for him to run, but his feet were frozen to the ground, paralyzed by fear. The classroom, once a place of learning and comfort, had become a battleground. And for Alex and the others, their fight for survival had just begun. The infected moved slowly, their groans reverberating through the hall, dragging their bloodied, disfigured bodies as they stumbled forward with relentless hunger. The room, which had once been filled with the mundane sounds of academia, was now silent except for the horrific moans echoing from the hallway. Every student's heart beat loudly in their chest as they processed what they were witnessing. Alex's instincts kicked in, and he found himself bolting to the side of the room, his heart racing as the first of the infected entered the lecture hall. A once familiar face, now twisted into a grotesque version of itself, lurched towards the group of students in the back. Its flesh hung from its bones in tattered strips, the eyes wide and vacant, yet the hunger, there was no mistaking the hunger. "What the hell is going on?" someone screamed, but their voice was drowned by the relentless groaning of the undead. Panic erupted. Chairs scraped against the floor as students scrambled to find cover or flee. Maria's legs refused to move, her mind racing. She had seen some horror films before, but nothing had ever prepared her for this. She could hear her friends shouting in fear, their voices cutting through the chaos like knives. The law student who had collapsed on the floor earlier was now trembling uncontrollably, her body shuddering. "We need to get out of here," she whispered, almost in a trance. "They'll come for all of us." Alex's mind was sharp, despite the fear. He needed to think quickly. The door was still open, but more of them were coming, their twisted forms filling the doorway, blocking any hope of escape. He turned to look for a way out, his gaze darting to the back of the lecture hall. A small exit sign above the emergency door glowed faintly, barely noticeable amid the madness. "We need to get to that exit," Alex shouted, his voice breaking through the panic. "Come on, we have to move now." Maria snapped back to reality, her eyes wide with realization. "But the hallway is filled with them. We'll never make it." Alex didn't have time to argue. Without another word, he grabbed Maria's wrist, pulling her toward the back of the room. The others, some terrified, others frozen, watched them move, but no one else seemed to take action. James, Alex's friend, was just a few steps behind them, his face white as a sheet. "We're gonna die if we stay here," he cried out, fear lacing his words. Suddenly, there was a loud scream from the other side of the room. A student, panicked and stumbling, tried to run toward the door, but one of the infected lunged at them, sinking its teeth into their neck. The screech that followed was horrifying. Blood splattered the floor as the student was dragged to the ground, their body jerked violently before they fell still, their blood pooling around them. The sight was enough to break whatever resolve the remaining students had left. A tidal wave of panic hit the room as everyone tried to flee, but the infected moved faster than expected, their hands reaching out hungrily. Maria, her heart pounding in her chest, realized that Alex was right. The exit was their only chance. As they approached the door, Alex shoved it open, and a flood of fresh, cool air hit them. It was a brief relief, but not for long. The quad outside had descended into complete chaos. Students were running for their lives, but the infected were everywhere. A student's screams were cut short as they were dragged to the ground by one of the monstrous figures. The quad had become a battleground, filled with the deafening sounds of the undead as they closed in on their prey. Maria and Alex stood frozen at the door, their minds struggling to process the nightmarish scene unfolding in front of them. The law student who had warned them earlier now bolted out into the chaos, screaming in terror as she ran toward the campus gates, but she never made it. Alex grabbed Maria's arm again, pulling her away from the door. "We can't stay here. We need to get to the dorms. There has to be a safe place." But even as they sprinted across the quad, the ground beneath them trembled with the thunderous sound of something large crashing in the distance. It was coming from the main building, from the heart of the university. As Alex looked up at the towering structures that once felt so safe, he realized just how vulnerable they were now. The infected were everywhere. Maria's legs burned, but she pushed herself harder, ignoring the pain, knowing there was no time to stop. They ran past a group of students trying to barricade themselves inside a classroom, but it was no use. The door was already being hammered by the undead from the other side. Alex glanced over his shoulder to see the infected were gaining on them. One of the creatures lunged for a student running ahead of them, sinking its teeth into their shoulder. The student screamed in pain before being dragged back into the mob of infected, their body jerking and twitching uncontrollably. Maria let out a strangled sob. What is happening to the world? Alex had no answers. The world they knew, the university they had taken for granted, had become a hunting ground, and they were nothing more than prey. As they reached the entrance to the dorms, they stumbled inside, breathing heavily, eyes wide with fear. The doors slammed shut behind them, but they knew it wouldn't be enough. The infected were relentless. And now, in the safety of the dorms, they had to come to terms with the cold reality: survival wasn't guaranteed. But for now, the small solace of the dorms was all they had. The dormitory door slammed shut behind Alex and Maria, the loud thud echoing through the empty lobby. Their ragged breaths filled the air as they leaned against the door, trying to catch their breath. The echoes of screams and chaos from outside had dimmed, but they knew it was only a matter of time before the infected found their way inside. Alex looked around. The lobby was eerily quiet, with no sign of any other students. It was unsettling to realize how quickly their once safe campus had turned into a nightmare. They had no plan, no clear idea of where to go next. The world had shifted in a matter of hours, and they were left scrambling for survival. "We need to find other people," Maria said, her voice shaky but determined. "There must be others who made it in here. We can't survive alone." Alex nodded, though doubt gnawed at him. The idea of teaming up with strangers wasn't comforting, especially after seeing how quickly people turned on each other in the chaos. Trust was a fragile thing now. He had seen students trample over each other to escape, with no regard for those left behind. The idea of relying on others felt dangerous, but Maria was right. They couldn't do this alone. They began to move through the dormitory building, cautiously peeking into rooms and hallways. The place, normally bustling with student life, was now eerily silent. The lights flickered intermittently, casting shadows across the walls. Alex felt a chill run down his spine as the tension in the air seemed to thicken with every step. They came across a few locked rooms, and every time they passed a window, Alex felt a wave of dread as he saw the mob of infected gathering outside, shambling aimlessly. "Maybe the dining hall," Maria suggested, pointing down the hall. "It's big. We could barricade ourselves in there." Alex didn't hesitate. The dining hall was one of the largest areas on campus and would offer a better chance of survival than any dorm room. It was also close enough to the main entrance, where they could find supplies. They hurried to the dining hall, hoping they weren't too late. When they arrived, the doors were ajar, and the lights inside flickered erratically. The smell of spilled food and stale air hit them as they stepped inside. Tables had been overturned, and there were signs of a struggle: broken chairs, discarded trays, and papers scattered across the floor. It was clear that others had been here, but there was no sign of anyone now. Alex felt uneasy. What if they're already gone? Maria scanned the room. "We have to try," she said. "It's better than staying in the hallways." They made their way deeper into the dining hall, checking each corner carefully. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the kitchen area, followed by a string of curses. Maria flinched and took a step back, but Alex held up a hand to stop her. His instincts told him not to move too quickly. This could be another student, or worse, one of the infected. Alex cautiously approached the kitchen and peered around the corner. To his relief, a group of students was gathered inside, their faces wide with fear. They were all heavily armed with makeshift weapons, metal pipes, broken broomsticks, and even a fire extinguisher. But despite the weapons, their expressions were tense, as though they weren't sure whether to trust each other. "Who are you?" one of the students, a tall guy with a scruffy beard, called out, his voice rough with exhaustion. He raised his weapon slightly, not in a threatening manner, but it was clear he was on edge. "We're just trying to survive," Alex replied quickly. "We don't want any trouble. We saw the dining hall and thought it might be safer here." The tall guy nodded slowly, glancing over at the others. "We thought the same thing," he said, his voice low. "But it's getting worse out there. The campus is overrun." Maria stepped forward, her eyes scanning the group. "Where are the others? There must be more students. They're either hiding or, they didn't make it," another student spoke up, a girl with dark hair and bruised knuckles. "We've been stuck here for the last hour, trying to figure out what to do. We haven't heard from anyone else. It's just us." Alex felt a wave of frustration. They had barely made it through the initial chaos, and now it seemed like the hope of finding safety and more people was slipping away. But there was no time to dwell on it. The infected were closing in, and they needed a plan. "How many of you are there?" Alex asked, his voice firm. "6 of us," the guy with the beard said, his eyes narrowing. "But that's counting you two now. If you're staying, you'll need to help with the barricades." Maria looked at Alex, her face tense. They both knew what had to be done. The question now wasn't whether to barricade themselves in, it was how long they could hold out. "All right," Maria said, her voice gaining strength. "Let's start securing the exits. We need to block the doors, board up the windows, and make sure there's no way for them to get in." The group nodded, and Alex could see the resolve in their eyes. They weren't just scared, they were survivors. They had been through hell already, and they weren't about to give up without a fight. As they set to work, Alex glanced back out the window. The infected had gathered in large groups, some still wandering aimlessly while others were more focused, attracted to the sounds of life. The building wasn't secure, not yet, but for the first time since the outbreak began, he felt like they might stand a chance. But as he moved to help Maria with the barricades, a sharp, sudden noise broke the silence, footsteps coming from the other side of the kitchen door. The tall guy froze, his eyes wide with panic. "That's not us." Alex felt a chill crawl up his spine. The door handle rattled. Betrayal, it seemed, was coming from inside. The kitchen door rattled once more, louder this time, as if something, or someone, was testing the handle. The 6 survivors froze in place, their makeshift weapons raised in tense anticipation. Maria's eyes darted from the door to Alex, her breath quickening as her grip tightened on the fire extinguisher she had grabbed. Alex felt the same fear spreading in his chest, but he forced himself to remain calm. The last thing they needed was panic. They had enough to deal with already. "Who's out there?" the guy with the scruffy beard demanded, his voice shaking as he took a step toward the door. The rattling stopped, and for a brief, terrifying moment, there was only silence. Then, a muffled voice came from the other side, low and strained. "It's me. Tom. Please, open the door." Tom? Alex's mind raced. He knew a few students named Tom, but the voice sounded off, strained, desperate. The fact that it was muffled sent alarm bells ringing in his head. He glanced at Maria, who looked just as uncertain. "How do we know it's really you?" Maria called out, her voice trembling slightly. There was a pause, and then Tom's voice returned, more frantic. "Please. They're coming for me. I'm not alone. You have to let me in. They're everywhere." Alex looked back at the others. The tall guy, who had initially been in charge of the group, looked hesitant, torn between letting the survivor in and protecting their own. "You can't trust anyone," the girl with the bruised knuckles muttered, her eyes narrowed. "We've seen people turn, who's to say he hasn't already?" The tension in the room was palpable, each survivor trying to read the others' faces for any sign of a decision. But just as the door rattled once more, a loud crash sounded from the window, followed by the unmistakable growl of one of the infected. The group instinctively turned toward the noise, and Alex's heart dropped into his stomach. More infected were already in the courtyard, drawn by the sound. The screams of other students outside echoed faintly. "We don't have time," Alex said, stepping forward. He wasn't sure what to do, but the reality of the situation hit him hard. There was no choice. "We need to decide now." The tall guy stared at the door, then back at the group. "Let him in. If it's really him, we might be able to help him. But if it's not," he didn't finish the thought, but the meaning was clear. Without another word, the group moved into action. The girl with the dark hair hurried to the kitchen counter and grabbed a knife, holding it defensively, while another student quickly grabbed a nearby broomstick. They crowded around the door, ready to react to anything that might come through. Alex, his heart pounding, moved cautiously toward the door. "Stay back," he whispered to Maria as he approached. His hand hovered over the handle, his mind screaming at him to stop, to think it through. But the growls of the infected outside were growing louder, and Tom's desperate plea tugged at something deep inside him. With a sudden, decisive motion, Alex twisted the door handle and swung the door open. Tom stumbled inside, falling to his knees as he did. He was breathing heavily, his clothes torn, his face covered in dirt and blood. His eyes were wide with terror. But it wasn't the Tom Alex remembered. Something was wrong. His pupils were dilated, and his hands trembled as he crawled into the room, desperate to escape whatever had been chasing him. "Shut the door." Tom gasped, his voice shaking. "Hurry." Without thinking, Alex slammed the door shut, the bolt clicking into place as the others moved into defensive positions. Tom pulled himself up, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He glanced around, his eyes shifting nervously from one person to the next. He was clearly on edge, his movements jerky, but he wasn't attacking. He was too afraid. But then something in Alex's gut told him this wasn't over. Tom wasn't just frightened. He was hiding something. "Are you all right?" Maria asked cautiously, stepping forward, her eyes scanning Tom's disheveled form. Tom's response was quick. "I'm fine, just let me catch my breath. They were all around me. I didn't know where else to go." His hands shook violently, and his face was streaked with sweat. Alex noticed something that made his blood run cold. Tom's neck was bruised. A faint, almost imperceptible bite mark was visible, hidden beneath the dirt and grime. It wasn't the kind of injury someone would get from a fall or an accident. He hadn't been attacked. He had been bitten. Maria's eyes locked with Alex's, and the realization hit them both at the same time. Tom was already infected. He was hiding it. Before Alex could say anything, one of the other students, a tall girl with short hair, broke the silence. "Wait, what's that on his neck?" Tom's face went pale, and he immediately covered the mark, panic flashing across his features. "No. No, it's not what you think. It's nothing. It's just a scratch. I've been through a lot. I'm just tired." But the group wasn't convinced. "Get away from him," the girl with bruised knuckles shouted, her knife raised. "He's lying." Tom's eyes widened with fear, but it was clear that the infection had begun to take hold of him. The others backed away, their weapons raised. The room was filled with tense silence as they waited for Tom to make his next move. Tom opened his mouth to speak, but the words came out in a garbled hiss. His eyes rolled back for a moment, and then his whole body seemed to convulse. His breathing became more shallow, his skin growing paler by the second. Alex's heart pounded. They had been duped. Tom wasn't just a survivor, he was one of them. A low growl escaped Tom's throat as he lunged forward, knocking over a chair in his path. The group scattered, weapons raised, but it was too late. The transformation had begun. "Get him!" Maria shouted. As Tom closed in on the group, Alex and the others struggled to push him back, the reality of their situation settling in. Trust was a fragile thing, and betrayal had come from within their own walls. The line between life and death had blurred, and now they had to fight to survive, not just the infected, but the people who could turn on them in an instant. The air in the dining hall was thick with tension. Tom, now fully transformed, staggered across the room, his eyes wild with hunger, his teeth bared in a snarl. His body jerked and twitched with the unnatural movements of the infected, and the room erupted in chaos as the group struggled to protect themselves. Alex barely had time to react before Tom lunged at one of the survivors, a wiry guy named Jake, who had been standing near the counter. Tom's jaws clamped down on Jake's arm, and the sickening sound of flesh tearing echoed through the room. Jake screamed, trying to pull away, but it was futile. The infection was spreading, and there was no stopping it now. "Help him!" Maria screamed, her voice cracking as she grabbed a metal rod from one of the broken chairs. But as she rushed to help, another survivor, the girl with the bruised knuckles, raised her weapon. "Don't! He's gone, there's nothing we can do." Alex's mind raced, trying to piece together a plan. The others were panicking, the noise and chaos escalating with each passing second. Tom was relentless, dragging Jake to the floor and gnawing at his arm as the others backed away in terror. Alex's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. They were running out of time, and they were already losing people. The infected had breached their safe haven, and there was no way to stop the spread. With a growl, Tom whipped his head around, eyes locking onto Alex as if sensing the last shred of resistance in the room. Without thinking, Alex grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher and hurled it toward Tom, the metal canister colliding with his head and causing the creature to stagger back. "Move!" Alex yelled, adrenaline pumping through his veins. "Get to the back. Barricade the door." The others hesitated for a split second before they moved, each of them in varying states of panic. Maria and the girl with the bruised knuckles rushed toward the storage room at the back of the dining hall, while the tall guy and the rest tried to hold the door to the kitchen, preparing to reinforce it. Jake's scream rang out again, and Alex turned just in time to see the infected Tom sink his teeth into Jake's throat, his once friend now becoming another mindless monster in the growing horde. There was no time to mourn. "Alex, we need to go now." Maria's voice echoed from the storage room as she held the door open. Alex hesitated. "We can't leave Jake behind." The girl with the bruised knuckles, her face grim, looked over at the group. "He's already gone, Alex. We need to leave. Now." She was right. Alex knew it. The infection spread too quickly, and there was no saving Jake. There was no saving Tom. They were already dead, their bodies nothing more than vessels for the undead to use. With a heavy heart, Alex nodded. "Let's go." They rushed into the storage room, where Maria was already attempting to block the door with crates and shelves. Alex joined in, shoving everything he could find against the door to fortify their position. The sounds of the infected's growls grew louder, and soon, the thumping of their footsteps was clear outside the room. The group was silent as they worked, their faces tense, their hands shaking with fear. No one spoke a word, as the reality of their situation settled in. Every move could be their last. When they finally finished barricading the storage room, Alex slid down the wall, breathing heavily. The room was small, cluttered with old boxes and cleaning supplies, but it would have to do for now. There was no guarantee it would hold for long, but it was all they had. Maria sat beside him, her face pale and her hands still trembling. "What now?" she asked, her voice small. Alex wiped his forehead, trying to clear the panic that was threatening to overtake him. "Now, we wait. How long can we keep doing this?" The girl with the bruised knuckles spoke up, her voice hard. "We keep hiding, keep running, but there's no real escape. The whole campus is overrun. How long before they come for us, too?" Alex stared at the door, the reality of her words sinking in. There was no escaping this. The world had changed in ways none of them could have predicted. And even if they managed to survive the night, what next? Would there be another group of infected waiting for them in the morning? "Not long," Alex said finally. "But we have to hold on. We have to stay strong. We'll figure something out. We just need to keep moving, keep looking for other survivors." Maria looked at him, her eyes filled with doubt. "You think there are more survivors out there? After everything we've seen?" Alex didn't answer right away. He wanted to say yes, to give her hope, but deep down, he wasn't so sure. The campus was a mess, and who knew how far the infection had spread. But he couldn't tell her that. "There have to be," he said finally, his voice steady. "We just have to find them." The silence that followed felt suffocating. No one spoke, each person lost in their own thoughts. The group had been through too much, and yet they knew the worst was far from over. Hours passed. The light from the dim overhead bulbs flickered intermittently, casting long shadows across the room. The growls and moans of the infected echoed from outside, but it was strangely quiet in the storage room. It was a kind of false peace, a brief lull before the storm. At some point, exhaustion set in. Alex closed his eyes, leaning his head against the cold, concrete wall. His mind raced with images of what they had left behind, friends lost to the infected, the chaos, the violence. And yet, his survival instincts drove him forward. But he couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. That they were missing something. Something important. The door to the storage room shuddered. It was the first sign that their time was running out. The sounds outside the storage room were growing louder, more frantic. The infected were closing in, their groans and snarls reverberating through the walls. It wasn't just the infected they had to worry about anymore. The survivors were beginning to break down, too. Alex sat with his back against the concrete wall, his thoughts swirling in a whirlwind of confusion, fear, and guilt. He couldn't stop thinking about Jake and Tom, his two friends who were now gone, their fates sealed in the worst possible way. It was all happening too quickly, too violently. 1 minute, they were just students attending class, and now, their world had turned into a never-ending nightmare. He glanced over at Maria, who was sitting on the opposite side of the room, her hands clenched into fists, staring at the floor. The others were spread out, each lost in their own thoughts, the weight of what had happened pressing down on them. Maria caught Alex's eye and gave him a small, strained smile. "We need to do something," she said quietly. "We can't just sit here." Alex looked around the room, the dim light flickering from the bulb overhead. The group was tired, physically and emotionally drained. Everyone was on edge, but they all knew that staying put wasn't going to save them. "We can't stay here forever," the girl with the bruised knuckles spoke up, her voice hard. "We need to find a way out. A way to fight back." "There's nothing to fight with," the tall guy muttered, his eyes hollow. "We barely have enough supplies to last another day." "We can't just wait to die," the girl continued, her voice rising. "The infected are everywhere. If we stay here much longer, we'll be trapped." Alex stood up, rubbing his face with both hands. He could feel the exhaustion creeping in, but he knew they were right. The longer they stayed hidden, the less chance they had of surviving. They needed to move. They needed to find a way out before the infected broke through. "Okay," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty gnawing at him. "We'll make a run for it. We'll find an exit, head to the parking garage. We can take the cars, get out of here." "You really think that's going to work?" the girl with the bruised knuckles snapped. "The place is overrun. The roads are swarming with them. We'll never make it." Maria looked at Alex, her eyes filled with doubt, but there was something else there too, hope. She knew it was their only option, no matter how impossible it seemed. "We have to try," she said softly. "It's the only way." Alex nodded. He wasn't sure what to expect out there, but staying put was a death sentence. If they didn't act, they'd eventually be overwhelmed. There were no guarantees, but doing nothing wasn't an option. "We'll move in the dark," Alex instructed, his voice low. "We won't attract attention. We'll stick to the halls, avoid open spaces. We'll make our way to the parking garage and find a way out." The group exchanged uneasy glances, but they all nodded. The fear was palpable, but there was a certain unity in the decision. They had come this far. There was no turning back now. Alex turned toward the door. "Let's go." The group moved cautiously, quietly, each step weighed down by the heavy knowledge of what lay outside. The sound of the infected groaning in the halls was a constant reminder of the danger they faced. Every corner they turned, every door they passed, could be their last. But they pushed forward, one slow, careful step at a time. They navigated the building's dark hallways, trying to stay out of sight. The overhead lights flickered erratically, casting long shadows that seemed to move and twist, making the already eerie surroundings feel even more suffocating. Every footstep felt like it might alert the infected to their presence. The quiet was deafening. As they neared the main exit, Alex's heart raced. They were almost there. Just a little further. Then, without warning, a loud crash echoed from the floor above. The building shook, and the group froze, their breath caught in their throats. A moment later, they heard the unmistakable sound of shuffling feet, the low growls of the infected drawing nearer. They had attracted attention. "Move!" Alex hissed, his voice urgent. They ran, as fast as they could without drawing too much attention, rounding corners and ducking behind furniture. The infected were close, their growls getting louder with each passing second. It was no longer just a matter of avoiding them, it was a matter of outrunning them. The group reached the stairwell leading down to the parking garage. The door was slightly ajar, and Alex pushed it open, ushering everyone inside. But as they descended the stairs, they saw it, the parking garage, dimly lit by emergency lights, was swarming with infected. Dozens of them were scattered between the rows of parked cars, groaning and stumbling around aimlessly. "This is it," the girl with the bruised knuckles whispered. "We can't go through that." Alex's stomach dropped. There were too many of them. It was a dead end. But then, he spotted something in the far corner of the garage. A car, parked near the exit, its lights still on. The keys were in the ignition. "That car," Alex said, his voice filled with a sudden surge of hope. "We can make it. "We'll never get past them," Maria said, her eyes wide with panic. Alex's mind raced. There had to be a way. They couldn't afford to hesitate. He turned to the group, his voice low and firm. "We're making a run for it. Stay close. Follow me." The group moved quickly, dodging between cars, the infected unaware of their presence, yet every step was a risk, every moment filled with the possibility of disaster. As they reached the car, Alex glanced over his shoulder. The infected were closing in, their snarls filling the air. There was no turning back now. He yanked open the car door, his heart racing as he started the engine. The others piled in, slamming the doors shut as Alex floored the gas pedal. The tires squealed against the asphalt, the car lunging forward. But as they neared the exit, a sharp, sudden sound pierced the air, a bullet, narrowly missing the car as it zoomed past. Alex's eyes widened. Someone was shooting at them. And that someone was human. The engine roared as Alex slammed his foot on the accelerator, the tires screeching as the car tore through the parking garage. The infected, unaware of the group's escape plan, were still shambling aimlessly between the cars, but the real danger wasn't just the undead, it was the other humans who were now hunting them. As the car sped toward the exit, the sharp sound of another bullet whizzed past, striking the metal frame of the car with a loud bang. Alex's heart skipped a beat, his grip tightening on the steering wheel. He could see the dim outline of a figure on a nearby balcony, a rifle aimed directly at them. "Duck!" Alex shouted, slamming his foot down harder. The car lurched forward, tires spinning in the rain-slicked garage. He could hear the others in the back seat, their fear palpable as they scrambled to stay down and out of the line of fire. The infected in the garage were beginning to react, sensing the movement, but the real threat was still above them. The sniper. "Go! Go! Go!" the girl with the bruised knuckles screamed, her voice tight with panic. Alex swerved the car to the side, narrowly avoiding a collision with a row of parked vehicles as another bullet struck the side of the car. The back window shattered, sending shards of glass flying across the seats. Maria screamed as she ducked further, pulling her knees to her chest. "We can't outrun him," the tall guy shouted from the back. "He's got a clear shot. We don't have a choice." Alex yelled, keeping his foot on the gas as he veered toward the exit. The figure above them fired again, and this time, the bullet hit the rearview mirror, knocking it clean off. The exit was in sight, but they were running out of time. "Hang on!" Alex shouted. With a final surge of speed, the car shot forward, narrowly dodging a barricade of cars and dumpsters that had been left to block the way. The sniper fired once more, but Alex was too fast. The bullet missed, embedding itself into the steel frame of a nearby car as they burst through the exit. The sudden shift from the garage's dim lighting to the blinding sunlight outside was disorienting. Alex squinted against the light, his pulse racing as the car skidded onto the main road. The sound of the engine, the wind rushing through the open windows, and the distant groans of the infected faded as they sped away, but the danger wasn't over. Ahead, the city was a chaotic mess. Smoke rose in the distance, and the roads were filled with abandoned vehicles. As Alex looked around, he realized that they weren't the only ones trying to escape. The streets were littered with survivors, some in cars, others on foot. Some were running from the infected, others seemed to be avoiding them altogether, their eyes filled with suspicion and fear. "Where do we go now?" Maria asked, her voice trembling as she looked out the window. "We need to get out of the city," Alex replied, his hand still gripping the steering wheel tightly. "We need to find somewhere safe." But as he drove, the reality of their situation began to settle in. The city was a war zone, and they were trapped in the middle of it. The roads were blocked, the streets filled with debris. Escape was no longer as simple as driving away. The infected were everywhere, and now, there were other survivors, survivors who might be just as dangerous as the undead. The car jolted as they hit a pile of debris in the middle of the road, sending the group tumbling forward. Alex cursed under his breath as he wrestled with the wheel, trying to regain control. "We need to find another way out of here," the girl with the bruised knuckles shouted. "I know," Alex said, his voice tense. "We'll find a way around. Just hang on." The car bounced and swerved, narrowly avoiding other vehicles and pedestrians scrambling to escape. They needed to stay focused. They needed to keep moving. Suddenly, a loud screech echoed in the distance, followed by a burst of gunfire. Alex's eyes snapped to the side as a group of survivors in another vehicle appeared, barreling down the street toward them. There was no doubt in his mind, they were armed, and they weren't here to help. Alex swerved the car to the left, narrowly avoiding a collision with the other vehicle. The gunfire continued, and the group was forced to duck as bullets ricocheted off the sides of the car. "They're shooting at us!" Maria screamed. "We need to get out of here!" Alex shouted, his heart pounding as the adrenaline surged through his body. He turned sharply, cutting through an alleyway that was barely wide enough to fit the car. The other vehicle was still pursuing them, relentless in their pursuit. Alex could see the faces of the survivors in the back, their expressions wild with desperation. The group was closing in. Alex had no choice but to push the car to its limits, speeding through the narrow streets, weaving between abandoned cars and piles of rubble. The sound of the gunfire behind them was deafening, but Alex kept his focus on the road, his eyes scanning for any possible escape routes. Then, just as it seemed like they might be cornered, Alex spotted it, a bridge in the distance. It was a long shot, but it was their only hope. "There!" Alex yelled, pointing toward the bridge. "We can make it." With a final burst of speed, the car shot toward the bridge. Behind them, the gunfire ceased, but Alex didn't dare slow down. They were almost there, just a little further. But as they neared the entrance to the bridge, a loud crash echoed through the air. The other vehicle had caught up, and they had just rammed into the side of the car, sending it spinning. The car veered off the road, narrowly avoiding the railing. Alex gritted his teeth and fought to regain control, but the impact had thrown them off course. The car spun out of control, heading straight for the edge of the bridge. The world seemed to slow as the car hurtled toward the edge. Alex's heart pounded in his chest, his thoughts flashing through his mind faster than he could process them. They were running out of time. They were running out of options. And then, with a deafening crash, the car slammed into the railing. The car spun uncontrollably, its tires screeching against the metal railing as it tilted dangerously. The world outside blurred into a dizzying vortex of concrete, steel, and the rushing sound of wind. Alex's heart was in his throat as he fought with the steering wheel, trying to steer the vehicle back into control. The bridge loomed ahead like a final, grim barrier, but they were fast approaching the edge. "Brace for impact!" Alex shouted, his voice hoarse from panic. A final violent jolt threw everyone against their seatbelts as the car slammed into the railing. The metal bent and screeched, and for a moment, it seemed like they would go over the edge. But somehow, miraculously, the car held its ground. It teetered precariously, its nose hanging over the edge of the bridge. The force of the impact had left everyone shaken, gasping for air, but they weren't finished yet. Alex quickly took in the situation. His hands were shaking, his heart still hammering in his chest, but he knew they had no time to waste. The other vehicle was still coming, its tires screeching as it neared. The gunmen had to be close, and if they didn't act quickly, they'd all be trapped. "We need to get out. Now!" Alex yelled, his voice urgent. Maria was the first to move, unbuckling her seatbelt and looking out of the shattered window. The others followed suit, eyes wide with fear. The car's precarious position wasn't a luxury they could afford. The railing groaned under the weight of the vehicle, threatening to give way. Alex knew they only had moments before gravity took its toll. "Go, go, go," shouted the girl with the bruised knuckles, scrambling to get out of her seat. Her eyes were wild, fear and adrenaline working in tandem. "Wait!" Alex snapped. "If we all move at once, the car could topple." But the other vehicle was closing in. Alex's thoughts raced. What was the best option now? They couldn't fight off an armed group. There was only one thing they could do. "Follow me," Alex called as he unbuckled his seatbelt and grabbed the door handle. He swung it open, his foot slamming against the door in a frantic attempt to create space. The door creaked, and the car groaned in response. The group wasted no time. They followed Alex's lead, pushing through the door and scrambling to the edge of the car, their feet sliding against the wet surface of the bridge. The wind howled around them as they carefully moved to the front of the vehicle, clutching onto anything they could. From behind, the sound of tires screeching and an engine revving grew louder. The pursuing car was almost on them, its headlights cutting through the haze of twilight like a predator closing in on its prey. "Get to the other side," Alex shouted, pointing toward the far side of the bridge where the shadows of trees could be seen. One by one, the survivors scrambled over the hood of the car, each making their way toward the railing on the other side, their movements frantic as they tried to get as far away from the edge as possible. But as Alex reached the front of the car, he felt something cold, metal, pressed against his back. A voice, low and menacing, hissed from behind him. "Not so fast." Alex froze, his blood running cold. He turned slowly to face the figure behind him, a man, disheveled and wild-eyed, holding a gun aimed directly at his chest. Behind him, the other survivors from the pursuing car were already climbing out, their weapons drawn. "I don't want trouble," Alex said, raising his hand slightly, his mind racing for a solution. "Oh, I think you do," the man sneered, his eyes flicking to the others. "I see you've made quite a mess of things. Thought you could just drive away, huh? You'll regret that." Maria, now on the other side of the car, turned to face the man. Her voice trembled with a mix of fear and defiance. "You can't stop us. We've come too far. You really think you can escape?" The man's laugh was bitter, echoing over the wind. "This city's ours now. You're just a bunch of ants trying to crawl away." The group, now fully on the bridge, was facing a standoff. The survivors who had chased them down were encircling them, their guns raised and their faces twisted with desperation. There was no way out now. Suddenly, the unmistakable sound of snarling filled the air. A low, guttural growl that sent chills down Alex's spine. He turned his head, and to his horror, the infected had arrived. Their grotesque forms, bloated and twisted, were pouring onto the bridge from both ends, their eyes vacant and hungry. The man with the gun saw it too. His eyes widened in shock and then narrowed with cold calculation. He aimed his weapon at Alex. "It seems your luck has run out." But as he pulled the trigger, a burst of gunfire rang out from behind him, followed by the sound of bodies dropping. The remaining armed survivors looked around in confusion. Then, a group of figures emerged from the shadows, running toward the bridge, another group of survivors, armed and ready to fight. It was a rescue, but it was chaotic. Gunfire exchanged between the two groups, the infected advancing with savage growls and shrieks. The world descended into chaos as the two factions fought to survive, but the infected were getting closer. "Move!" Alex shouted, his voice hoarse. "Get to the other side of the bridge." The group didn't need to be told twice. They sprinted, weaving through the chaos of fighting humans and undead, their breath ragged in their throats. The infected were closing in fast, but the sound of gunfire and explosions filled the air, momentarily drowning out the groans and snarls. Alex reached the far side of the bridge and didn't look back. He could hear the screams of those left behind, the crack of gunshots, and the roar of the undead as they overwhelmed the survivors. But he had no time to stop. The bridge was the last line of defense, and they had crossed it, barely. "Keep going," Alex urged, pulling the others forward. They ran through the desolate streets, their footsteps echoing in the emptiness. The city was a battleground, but they were free, for now.